There were mornings when I knew it was safe to leave the bedroom because he was passed out, and those were the mornings my dogs kept me going. Welcome to The Dog Who Asked for More, the podcast for dog parents whose lives look a little different because of their dog. This is where you figure out what your dog is actually telling you, stop second guessing yourself, and start building a path to a life that makes sense for both of you. I'm Em, a dog mom, former vet tech, dog trainer, and canine nutritionist who works with dog parents learning to live differently because of their dog. I'm going to tell you something I haven't said in exactly these words before. There was a period of my life during COVID, during a housing crisis, during an abusive relationship, where I was essentially trapped. We had broken up, but there was absolutely nowhere to go. We had had something called a derecho, and it had wiped out housing. And my disability made it even harder. And I was living in separate rooms of a home with someone I was no longer with, managing the situation every single day just to keep things from escalating. And every morning I would do a calculation. Is it safe to leave the bedroom yet? Is it safe to take the dogs outside? Is he passed out or is he a risk? On the mornings he was passed out, those were the only ones that were fully mine. And every single one of those mornings, Fitz and Toby were right there. Not because they understood what was happening. They didn't. They just needed me to get up and keep going. And so I did. I didn't get up those mornings for myself. I got up for them. I want to be careful here because I know some of you are in something right now that you haven't named out loud yet. And I'm not going to tell you what to do with that. But I am going to tell you that what you are feeling, the way your dog is sometimes the only thing that gets you moving, that's not a weakness. That's not something to be ashamed of. That's a nervous system finding its anchor. The dogs didn't know what I was carrying. They never do. But they stayed anyway. And some mornings that genuinely is enough to get your feet on the floor. Finding housing that would take two dogs when you're on disability in the middle of a pandemic after a natural disaster, that's not a simple problem. And so I stayed longer than I should have. And I managed. And I played the game of keeping things calm enough that nobody got hurt. I locked us in the bedroom at 8 p.m. every night because that was the only safe hour. And Toby and Fitz were in there with me every single night. I know I'm not the only one who has been here. Not in exactly this situation, but the place where your dog is the most stable relationship you have, where they're the reason you get out of bed, where loving them is the thing that keeps you functional when everything else is asking too much. And I also know that most people will never say that out loud because we're not supposed to need our dogs that way. We're supposed to have people for that. And when you don't, or when the people you have can't reach that part of you that needs reaching, and your dog can, there's shame attached to admitting it. There shouldn't be, but there is. I want to say it directly. If your dog is the reason you got up this morning, that's not nothing. That's not pathetic. That's a real relationship doing exactly what real relationships do, keeping you here, keeping you moving, giving you something that needs you back. We finally got out in January of 2022, and what I found on the other side of that wasn't immediate relief. It was the full weight of everything Fitz had been carrying through all of it. He was dysregulated. He was reactive. He was a dog who had been living in the same tension I had, absorbing the same environment, and nobody had been able to help either of us while we were inside of it. And I couldn't find anything that actually helped him, nothing that understood what we had both been through, nothing that spoke to the reality of a dog and a person who had survived something together and come out on the other side still carrying it in their bodies. That's why this exists. Not because I had it all figured out, because I definitely didn't, and because I know how alone it can feel. Here's what's hard about this. When your dog is your anchor, your primary source of stability, everything that happens with them feels higher stakes. Because it's not just a dog struggling. It's the one stable thing in your life showing cracks. And that is terrifying in a way that is so hard to explain to someone who doesn't live it. So you research more, you worry more, you change the food and you second guess the walk and you lie awake running the math on whether you're doing enough. Because if something happens to this dog, if you get this wrong, you lose the one thing that has been keeping you sane. The math runs constantly, and nobody sees it because from the outside, you look like somebody who really loves their dogs, and you do, but it's also much more than that. And carrying the more than that alone without anywhere to put it, that's its own kind of exhaustion. What I want you to hear, and I mean this very specifically, is that the fact that your dog kept you here is not a flaw in you. It's not a sign that something is wrong with the way that you're built. It might actually be the thing that saved you. And the dog who did that for you, that relationship is real. It counts. It matters as much as any relationship you've ever had. Your dog doesn't know what you're carrying, but they stay anyway. And some days, that's exactly enough. But here's where it gets a little complicated because when your dog is that important, when they're carrying that much weight in your life, the hard days hit them differently. The reactive incident on that walk isn't just a frustrating moment. It's a crack in one thing holding everything together. The food decision isn't just a nutrition question. It's what if I get this wrong and something happens to the one relationship that has never failed me? And so you carry more, you research more, and you show up more. And from the outside, it looks like dedication. And it is. But it's also the weight of loving something that has kept you here and being terrified of losing it at the same time. And that is so much to hold alone without anyone knowing what's actually happening underneath the dog content and the training research and the food switching. If your dog is the reason you got up today, I want you to know that I see what that means. Not just the love, the whole thing. What it cost you to get here, what it costs every day to keep going. The fact that you built your life around something that needed you and that asking more of them and being asked more by them changed who you became. That is not a small thing. That's the whole story. What if the dog who kept you here was always supposed to? You don't owe anyone an explanation for how much your dog means to you. You don't have to shrink what this relationship is. You don't have to pretend it's just a dog. It's not just a dog. And you've always known that. You just haven't had anywhere to say it. You can say it here. If this is where you are, if any of this landed, I want you to know that this community exists exactly because of this. If you'd like to connect on a deeper level, you can find the link in the episode description. So be kind, spread joy, and remember, they don't know what you're carrying. They just love you anyway.